and welcome to the Deep Sea Podcast, Pressurised, a short, punchy version of our main feed that gets right to the scientific point. If you like what you hear and you'd like to hear the full episode, you can find it in the same feed. And now, to get right to the point.
So who are we talking to today, that's all?
So someone called Andrea got in touch through Instagram just saying, hey, just discovered the show, really liked it. And then I looked at her profile and she's so much more interesting than us. She's great. So it turns out that she is pretty prolific and one of the early adopters of Blackwater diving, which I've gushed about a few times in the past. It's only really gone on for the last 8 years maybe. And it's a new form of diving over deep water in the open ocean at night where all the stuff comes up and it just leads to this stunning photography. And it was a really good chat. So I'll pass on to them now. To find out more about the world of Blackwater diving, I've got a whole group here with me. So I will just let you introduce yourselves to begin with.
My name is Andrea Whitaker. I am a jack of all trades in the dive industry, I suppose. So I primarily am a scuba instructor, underwater photographer. I teach underwater photography. And then I'm one of the main crew members on the Blackwater dives over the past 8 years we've been running these.
I'm Rich Collins, and I'm a retired businessman. I'm a Blackwater diver, amateur diver, and a photographer. And over the years, I've morphed into a collector and photographer for the Florida Museum of Natural History and also for the Smithsonian, as all of us have. And we've sort of turned into a research arm, a little bit of all sorts of different institutions that are looking to get information on invertebrates and larval fishes and so forth that inhabit the Blackwater realm.
And my name is Linda Iannello. I'm a retired IBMer, and I've been doing the Blackwater dives as long as they've been running them locally. So that's about 8 years, about 500 dives, and started out learning about these subjects, how to identify them, what they are, and then learn more about them, and eventually co-authored a book about Blackwater creatures so that we could educate other people. And then eventually got into the collecting with Rich, contributing to the science behind it all. And it's been great being able to hand them off to Rich, and then he catalogs and gets them to the appropriate scientists. So it's been a group effort, and it's just been great.
I have gushed about Blackwater diving on the show before because it really grabbed hold of me. But for anyone who's just landed on this episode without hearing any of the others, what is Blackwater diving? What sets it apart from scuba diving we might be more familiar with?
Blackwater diving is super special. So in Palm Beach in particular, at night after the sun goes down, we go out. It's about 4 to 6 miles offshore. So we're looking for depths typically between 700 to 800 feet. However, some nights we stay in a little closer to shore. So it would be perhaps 400, 500 feet deep. Then we have a long line that's got lights all over it, a float on top so it stays afloat, and a weight at the bottom so it stays taut. We throw that in the water. Generally, we're in the Gulf Stream, or we're in some portion of the Gulf Stream. And we throw the rig in with the lights on, and then everyone jumps in the water. So we're freely drifting in the Gulf Stream here in Palm Beach. And your quote-unquote dive guide is going to be this line with the lights all over it. So we creep within the vicinity of that light, and we're freely drifting. Maximum depth, generally speaking, for the majority of the dive is about 50 feet. And then we're looking for these larval or even pelagic creatures that you don't necessarily see on the reef or just generally on other recreational dives. So the idea of being out to those deeper depths is to hopefully get to see some deep water species or more pelagic species than what you would closer to shore.
No, that's a great summary, because a night dive has been a thing for a while, but this is quite specific. This is open water. This is over deep water. And yeah, it's its own thing. So that you sort of led onto it there with, why is a dive to 50 feet on the Deep Sea Podcast? It's because the deep sea comes to you.
That's right. It comes up every night. We're seeing all sorts of sort of fish that live in much, much deeper water than the water that we're in. All these sort of dial organisms that are coming up to the surface, in this sort of great migration every night after sunset, where, there's just this huge number of creatures rising from the depths. And you can actually see them sometimes when you're swimming around. You can see fish just shooting by you like a rocket heading towards the surface.
And why does it only seem to have appeared quite recently? Like it seems to be this 8-year mark. We've been scuba diving for so long, but it feels like blackwater diving is kind of new, or maybe it's galvanized and formed quite recently. And it was just something people used to do as a bit of a night dive kind of thing.
So you two may remember more of the origin of it in Palm Beach, but I recall one of our friends that also does the Blackwater dives with us came up to me and was talking about it. And perhaps he had heard about it because I think the year before we started, they were doing them in Hawaii and proposed it. And we kind of brought it to the captain and the owner of the facility one of the main ones that we run these through, and kind of sorted out how to create the rigging for the dive itself.
The earliest person I know about is Ryo in Japan. But, there was guys like Richard Harbison from Woods Hole. Back in the 70s, he started doing blue water dives in the open ocean to collect and find ctenophores because they're so hard to preserve, so hard to keep them. So they were going out and collecting, hand collecting. But so I think that's where the roots of it came from in terms of, these daytime dives and then just doing it at night's kind of a twist that, I think better camera gear, better scuba equipment, and virally hearing about it from other places. But it's great. It's a lot of fun. We're close to the Gulf Stream, so there's just a lot of water's moving. I mean, some nights we'll only drift a mile or two. Sometimes we'll go 5, 6, 7, 8 nautical miles in a 90-minute to 2-hour dive.
This feels highly, highly technical, this light guide that is helping you along, because you have no frame of reference. You are in a void.
That's your frame of reference. You've got that. And everything's drifting to the north with the Gulf Stream. But depending on which way the wind's blowing, the ball might be going a different direction.
Yeah.
So you might end up swimming east, west, or south even, because the wind is blowing out of the north.
Because you're all current. You have no wind drive.
You're going all current,
have it.
but the float might not be going as fast as you are. So you end up swimming in a different direction. And what can happen is you stop and start taking pictures of some little larval creature, and you collect it, and you're fussing around with your equipment and stuff, and you look around and you can't see the ball anymore. And meanwhile, you've got completely turned around in terms of what direction you're facing. But then you'll see like other divers' lights all around you. So like which way is who's near the ball and who's not, you don't know.
That's what really grabs me, because of course you're in this infinite void with very few reference markers, but the subjects, this is macro photography in the most part. You are zoomed right in this tiny, tiny little world. And I could totally see looking up after getting the fantastic shot or getting lost in the moment and realizing if it wasn't for the bubbles, I wouldn't know what up was.
That's right. Yeah. There's always other lights around. So it's not as disorienting as you'd think it is, but yeah, it's dark and you don't have a frame of reference, and there's certainly no bottom. We always joke, if you go to the bottom, you're only going to see it once. So that's out there.
So yeah, you're getting these classically deep sea critters coming up. And this is what sort of really grabbed me, because a quote that I'd given a couple of times was that the animals that I studied live in such a different environment that to be in the same place at the same time, one of us had to be dead.
Yeah.
Which sort of broke the illusion and sort of really made me humble about how different these environments were. But most of the abyssal fish and a lot of the invertebrates as well, they are dispersed up in the plankton. So I've seen images from you guys. You're swimming with a fish I associate with 5,000 meters,
right?
And probably a big, ugly brown or silver brute of a thing, whereas their kids are beautiful. Like a juvenile cuskeel is spectacular. A juvenile bathysaurus, a juvenile lizardfish, the adult is a monster. Right. But the juveniles are absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
On the back of this incredible experience, how did that then lead to citizen science? How did you then get involved in the project and the people who were hungry for these specimens?
We all belong to a club. For me, I went to a meeting a long time ago when I first started doing underwater photography, and there was a guest speaker who was talking about the fact that if you get into scuba diving, and I didn't get into it till I was in my 50s, if you get into scuba diving and you don't have a focus, you won't do it for very long. And so photography is my focus, but I wanted to do more than just photography. I wanted to actually do something with the images, something that lasted longer than just getting a magazine picture or something like that. I wanted to have some sort of impact with the work. So just by chance, I sent an email one night to a guy named Peter Schuchert, who was the curator of invertebrates at the Geneva Museum of Natural History, but also happened to be an editor of Worms, which is the go-to place for marine species taxonomy. So Peter's the editor. So I said, I noticed there's no images in here. We're trying to figure stuff out. We can't find images of the inverts. And, I'm trying to figure out what these things are. And he referred me to Professor Gustav Pauli, who's the curator of invertebrates at the Florida Museum. And they both said the same thing, which is the pictures are great and they're really interesting. And sometimes you can identify species from an image, but most of the time you can't. Most of the time you need a specimen to go with it. You need DNA, you need a specimen that's been preserved. So I met with Gustav and we decided to start collecting these things. And he gave me a whole bunch of gear, started with the most common things first. And gradually, as we learned to recognize the animals that were around us all the time, we started to recognize the ones that were rare, unusual. And Andrea and Linda are two of the best at finding the rare and unusual. I must say, the paper we just published, most of the glory shots were from Andrea and Linda. So we had 49 species of hydrozoans, 2 new species, and a bunch of new species that had never been seen before in the Atlantic. They're not really new to science, but they were species that were heretofore Indo-Pacific. And we continue to find stuff. I mean, that's the amazing thing is if you were doing bird photography, you went out to the Everglades and, I could take pictures of the great blue heron and it would go along with about 100 million other pictures out there of great blue herons. But the stuff we're photographing hasn't been seen in 100 years. Very often, we're finding hydrozoans and other animals that haven't been seen since they were described. And that could be 100 years ago.
I think Linda has a better description or idea, like getting the connection with the scientists as well, like on the larger scale, because you guys started the Facebook page, basically, where we were posting the images, and then all of a sudden scientists were hopping on and they're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, is that, we had no idea what so many of these subjects were. And after maybe we were a year into it, one of the guys in Anilau started the Facebook page, Blackwater Photo Group. And we started posting our findings. And it's like, I don't know what this is, And the scientists started paying attention to that group and started giving us ID help because, like you touched on, most of the things that they had seen were collected in a drift net. They're mangled. They haven't seen them with all their appendages flared and what they look like in situ. So it became a win-win. The scientists were looking at the images and saying, oh my God, that's what it really looks like. And this is what it is. And that led to, like I mentioned, we wrote a book to try to educate people. And I've worked really hard to maintain my website with galleries from the Blackwater findings and ID as best as we know it and constantly updated so that, again, learning people in our group, but all over the world, use that website to ID their findings. And the scientists have been so helpful. We never would have had a clue what so much of this stuff was if they hadn't started paying attention.
It's wonderful how this developed organically, just in sharing stuff and sharing an interest. Someone else with the right expertise will see a totally different side to it because they're works of art in their own right. But that extra layer of this is the thing that lives at 5,000 meters and we didn't know it looked like this as a juvenile. We knew they laid eggs. We knew they floated up. That's it. That's where the story ended.
And we knew how many fin rays it had. That's how they did a lot of the counting the fin rays. But to see it just all flared and in its environment. And that's the other advantage. Like with all of the things that we're collecting, we're providing images. So it's not just the subject and the chemical with no color. There's an image that goes with it. At least there's probably 10 images that go with it. So I think that's been a tremendous help to the scientists too with this collecting.
Yeah, it's that individual. You have museum standard sort of logging of this is the picture of this specimen.
Yeah, the collection's in the Florida Museum of Natural History's database, so anybody can look them up. And and the data goes in the GenBank, and other people are using the data, for their research as well. We just with the hydrozoans alone, we've been able to identify, I think, 8 new species. That's just stuff that we've collected.
Has your photography changed as you've learned more about the sort of science side of things and you become citizen scientists? Does it change the sort of like, well, this is beautiful composition as a work of art, but I also know what's important as a scientist?
I think if you look at when we first started years ago, it was very much so more ID photographs. And I think Linda can attest to this too, is that it's definitely become more behavioral now. So we certainly have nights where it's not like completely ramped up out there with all these amazing rare deep water species. Like we have slower nights. We started to turn our attention towards interesting behaviors, like seeing some of the things that the critters are eating, like seeing some predation, because that's what so many are out there doing anyway. So you get some interesting opportunities. Or sometimes like I have some interesting cuskeel shots that I wish I would have gotten a great ID shot of its face, because it's so cool and it's exciting. It's a great tail shot, like it's a great butt shot, but you can see some really interesting, like you can see the movement of how they swim. You can see different fin rays. You can see what's in their gut because they're so translucent. So things like that, I think, have become a bit more interesting for me anyways than just ID shot.
Linda and Andrea have gotten me a stack of images recently of pelagic nudibranchs feeding.
Wow.
So very little literature about what do they really eat. And we were able to confirm some of the things that were believed, and we found some new things that they dine on as well. So we're working on a paper right now.
There'll be some keen photographers and techie folks listening, I'm sure. What are your setups like? What is I've only seen like looking out of the lens. I don't know what you guys look like when you're down there. I'm guessing it's a handheld rig, lots of dedicated lighting. Do you use different setups? Do you all have your own favorites?
Yep.
Yeah. By and large, in West Palm Beach, people use Nauticam brand housings and generally have a Nikon D800 or a D500 camera inside. It's usually a 60 millimeter macro lens, a couple of flashes, and usually focus lights of some sort. And there's a bunch of great brands on the market. And I also use some lights in the blue wavelength. I do that to sort of stimulate fluorescence. Some of these creatures fluoresce so strongly that you can see it with the naked eye. You actually don't even need a yellow filter to sort of stimulate a little bit some of this fluorescence. But if you put a yellow filter on the camera and you use some of this blue light, you can find also things that are fluorescing down there.
For one thing, the rigs are big. I mean, you've got this full-blown DSLR in a housing, 2 strobes, 2 focus lights, and I actually use 3 strobes. I'm one of the few that uses 3. So this is very task intensive, trying to get pictures of the subject. And then you have to get it into a bag using lights that are on your camera. I swear most of them know what you're trying to do and take off.
They're all about predator avoidance, and that's what you guys are.
And so my particular rig is a D500 with a 60 millimeter and everything else. And I believe Andrea uses D500 also, right?
I do. My only difference that I have is I am a glutton for more torture, and I use diopters from time to time. So I like to make it even more challenging and get more magnified and get as close to the subject as possible, which sometimes I have to give up, but it can be really rewarding other times.
Andrea's not saying it, but the problem with diopters is you have an extremely shallow depth of field. And again, these moving subjects, it's hard to track it with a diopter on the lens. And so that adds an extra degree of difficulty for sure.
We talked about exploring it a little bit here because, of course, around New Zealand, we've got some great deep water and some fun currents that it would be fun to interact with. But the immediate worry was, well, you look like a very distracted prey animal because you're focusing in on something else. Do you ever worry about who else is out there watching you?
We've had a couple of times where the occasional decent sized suckerfish comes by, and you definitely look around like, what is it attached to? But at least in our area, we get occasional sharks that come through. I think we've had dolphins have scared a few photographers that are so focused, right? But for the most part, the sharks that we get are more or less just passing through, or in the cooler months, we'll get some juvenile silky sharks that will come in and they'll get really curious and they'll kind of bump you and check you out, which is a bit unnerving. But then I think most of us just get frustrated because now we can't focus on taking photographs of the tiny
Spoiling the
things.
shot.
Actually, the only injuries anybody's gotten have been from billfish, actually. Somebody got slapped a few years ago by a swordfish, and we had a little spearfish incident. Someone got speared by a spearfish not too long ago. So that's kind of the only.
It's a few months ago.
But
Wow.
when you consider how many years we've been doing it and how many thousands of hours of man time we've got in the water, it's not much of a risk.
I'd love to have from each of you, if you have it at the top of your mind, a sort of anecdote of one of your favorite dives or one of your favorite moments.
I've been diving for over 30 years, and my most recent before this was a lot of muck diving and a lot of looking for little subjects, hunting more so than anything else. And it was always nudibranchs before that. And so I was photographing locally every nudibranch and trying to ID it and learn about it. So one of my, second or third Blackwater dives, I found a pelagic nudibranch and I didn't know there was such a thing. And I was thinking, oh, I'm so happy. There's pelagic nudibranchs. And like Andrea said, now I'm looking for the behavior. It's like, can I get them mating? Can I get them feeding? Can I get them spawning? So you kind of grow with the subject.
Yeah, I'd have to go with my first dive. I was one of those people that went on first dive and it was a spectacular night for Blackwater diving. Because, a lot of times we go out and we don't see very much at all. Because, the life in the ocean is kind of patchy and we see that all the time. Some nights we're really in the thick of it. But my first night was spectacular and I haven't seen one since, but I had a larval marlin and it was probably, about 2 centimeters long, something like that. It was spectacular, beautiful color and had its fin up. And so I got sort of a really prized shot like the first night I was out there. I haven't seen one of those since. So that was a great start. I was hooked.
Oh, I don't know. It's so hard to choose because there's been so many amazing nights. There's one in particular that I guess comes straight into my mind. It was one of those nights where you get in the water, it's like perfect visibility. You can see so far, but then every square inch of the ocean has something amazing. Like I felt like I was hopscotching from one subject to another. So it's like I start out and there's this really interesting cusk eel and it's got this beautiful pink speckles on its face. So I'm all giddy about that. I'm taking pictures and hanging out and there wasn't a lot of wind, so I don't have to chase the ball. You can just stay put, so these are some of the trials and tribulations of Blackwater dives and dealing with the different environmental conditions. Is it low vis? Is there a lot of particulate? Is the wind blowing? Are we going to chase the ball? This and that. And this was just that night where it was perfect and we didn't have to chase the ball. The viz was great. Subjects were everywhere. So there's this first cusk eel and then I get to show it to some other divers and then I move along to the next section and like right next to me there's a larval pancake batfish. So that's exciting and I get to hang out with that. And then I move from there and there's another different species of cusk eel. I think that was a really big highlight for me. It's just like hopscotching from like one subject to the next.
You all seem to have your specialist groups. Is there any particular animals that you've developed a real fondness for? And it comes across with the images you guys take. Are there any ones you're particularly fond of, either as an interest in that animal group or just they're always fun to interact with?
I love almost everything I see. It's just, I find them all interesting, but I do have an affinity for jellies and hydrozoans in particular. So.
Well, I have a huge soft spot for cephalopods. I think any cephalopod that I see, and I feel like in all of the Blackwater dives that we've done, I feel like we have barely scratched the surface for cephalopods. So I feel like for those, I'm always like, every time I'm out there, I'm always just like, there's going to be some new amazing cephalopod that they're seeing in Japan or somewhere else that we don't see, but it's here. It's going to be here. So those, I'm waiting. I'm still waiting for the next really cool cephalopod to pop up.
Mollusks, the sea angels and the sea butter. Well, the sea angels and sea butterflies. Nudies,
okay.
Definitely. Nudies, yes. But I also got really into identifying the sea angels, sea butterflies, and again, back to the behavior, since they're pelagic. You do catch some mating occasionally, although the darn things don't like the lights.
They don't like an audience.
Yes. But you can occasionally get them spawning. But that's been fascinating trying to ID those guys because there hasn't been so much literature on it. And luckily, one of the scientists has been a big help with that.
I feel like we've touched on lots of really useful resources that I think the listeners will be keen to follow up. So we'll put those in the show notes.
Oh, perfect.
So
sure.
anyone listening, if this has really grabbed you, have a look in the show notes. We'll provide a little info pack. Richard, any of the papers you particularly like that the group's been involved with, we can put those in the show notes as well, because we've got a good mix of sort of science interested people and scientists themselves. We may also inadvertently open a bit of a scientist floodgate, which hopefully will be useful, but you might find some experts appear on your radar, and it's our fault, and I'm sorry.
I think it's great. I'm anxious, eager to give images to any scientists for any projects. If the images will help illustrate these subjects or educate about these subjects, I'm really happy to share. And I think we need to educate people about this environment and the value before it starts getting destroyed, before we even understand it.
This is one of those hidden worlds again, one of those ones that could disappear and we hadn't even got to grasp with it. It's just the open ocean. It's like, no, there's a whole world.
For us, it's just right off the beach. I mean, it's only 5 or 6 miles off the beach. It's not that far away, but it is completely... sometimes I think about it, here in South Florida, there's millions of people live here. And there's just like a handful of us going out and looking at these things every night. It just strikes me as it's a great privilege to be doing it. And at the same time, I'm always surprised that nobody else is doing it. There aren't a lot of people doing it because it's pretty cool.
And the things it's linking up with, we pollute the surface waters, or we change what's going on, or change some of these current regimes. And you are knocking out the babies of animals that live at 5,000 meters. This idea that the deep sea is this self-contained little box and it's kind of fun, but you don't have to worry about it. But no, their kids are up with us, where we can pollute them and litter them and have quite direct impacts on them.
Their food comes up to the surface to feed, and it's the whole chain is dependent on. I mean, think about all the food that comes just from the elevations that we see. All their little houses collapse and sink to the bottom. It's a major part of the carbon cycle of dropping organic matter to the sea floor, and those guys are living near the surface.
Rich just mentioned the carbon cycling. I mean, that's another whole piece of this that people just have no knowledge of at all and don't understand the value.
This is the biggest migration on Earth, and it happens twice a day, and it's gigatons of carbon that's moving up and down. And it's right there under our noses, and we've not lifted this rock sufficiently. 8 years this has exploded, and the amount we've learned in this time.
Yeah, the gear and the cameras have gotten so much better. The gear is so much better, and if you think about just the fact that we've identified 8 new hydrozoans over the years here, that new species. When you think about, there is hardly any place else other than maybe the Mediterranean and the North Sea and the Baltic, perhaps, that have been studied as much as the coast of Florida, and we still managed to find that many new species just among the hydrozoans. And that's just a handful of us going out swimming around looking for weird-looking jellyfish. It just boggles your mind as to what is not known among all these other types of animals that haven't been as thoroughly studied. So it's in all these places in the world where no one's been doing this kind of work at all. So it's a big world, and we've only scratched the surface of it. So
yeah, it's eyes in the water. Part of the team science end of things, thank you for what you're doing to progress the scientific understanding, but also what you're doing for science communication and displaying these animals in such an attractive way. It actually does a huge, huge amount, because we can talk about the facts and figures and species numbers and things like that, but actually it's these works of art that grab people. And now I want to know more. Now, okay, you were rattling on about all these numbers of species and all these Latin names. It was all very boring, but this is cool. Now I would like to learn about it. So it's such an onboarding to get people excited in science. It's such an onboarding to get people caring about these animals, because there's so much personality in these shots that you're just like, oh, it was just a number, and now I'm looking at it, and now I kind of want it to be around. So I love this interface. Thank you so much for your time, gang. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Keep in touch. Give us updates of what you're up to. Any specialists you want us to send your way, if you, like you said, these groups that you would like to engage with scientists, I think we can help with that. We've got a nice little community on the go now. So absolutely keep in touch. And I've really enjoyed talking with you all.
We appreciate you having us on.
And that was a pressurized version of one of our longer episodes. If you enjoyed that and you would like to hear the full length episode, just match the episode numbers and you'll be able to find the full length version in the feed. Thanks for listening. We'll deep see you next time, and I abyss you already.